Drive east on I-8 past El Centro. The Salton Sea shows up without warning, a flat sheet of water sitting in the middle of the desert. And it's been shrinking for 2 decades. The lake bed it leaves behind isn't ordinary sand. A century of farm drainage loaded it with salts and chemicals. When the wind hits that playa, it moves into the towns nearby. A UC Irvine study found an association between that dust and reduced lung function in children. And the money trail leads straight back to San Diego's water supply. The reason is sitting in a 2003 contract, and a cap that was never designed to cover the real cost. Here's the document underneath all of that. By the end, you'll see how the deal capped what the agencies paid and pushed the rest onto the state. For mitigation, there's a cap, $133 million in 2003 dollars. That's the line. And above that line, the state covers the mitigation overage. For restoration, the legislature's own analyst says the state owns it. The deal behind this is the 2003 Quantification Settlement Agreement, which transferred 200,000 acre-feet of conserved Colorado River water from Imperial Valley farms to the San Diego region annually. It became a major slice of San Diego's supply. This isn't abstract. This is water that ends up in your tap. And those agricultural return flows were the main inflow, keeping the sea stable. Here's the case file. What the QSA moved, what it did to the sea, and how the bill got capped. To understand how a water contract signed in 2003 shows up in pediatric lung data, you have to go back to 1905. Because the Salton Sea only exists for one reason. The Salton Sea is not a natural lake. In 1905, the Colorado River broke through an irrigation canal and poured into the Salton Basin for 2 full years, leaving behind a massive inland sea where there had been desert. The lake stayed because Imperial Valley farmers kept irrigating and their excess water had nowhere else to go. That's the structural problem. The Salton Sea has no natural outlet. Water flows in but never flows out, so the main thing keeping the lake from evaporating into nothing was agricultural return flows from Imperial Valley farms. The Alamo River, the New River, and the Whitewater River carried that water in every day to replace what the desert sun burned off. Cut that inflow, and the math is simple. The lake shrinks. A century of inflow with no outlet also meant everything that washed off those fields, salts, agricultural chemicals, and sediments accumulated in the lake bed and concentrated as the water evaporated. The lake was running on artificial life support, and the quality of what remained was getting worse every decade. Here's what the Imperial Irrigation District understood by the 1990s. Internal documents from the era warned that the lake's water balance depended almost entirely on those agricultural return flows. Bottom line, any major transfer would accelerate the decline. The IID controlled the switch. The question was never whether the lake would shrink if the water moved. The question was who would pay when it did. In October 2003, water officials from across the Southwest signed the Quantification Settlement Agreement. That arrangement remains one of the largest water conservation and transfer agreements ever signed in U.S. history. And the document settled long-running disputes over who controlled how much Colorado River water in California, while locking in a transfer that would reshape the Imperial Valley for decades. The main parties were the Imperial Irrigation District, the San Diego County Water Authority, the Coachella Valley Water District, and the Metropolitan Water District. And state and federal agencies signed on as well. San Diego came away with senior priority access to that 200,000 acre-feet annually. So, the water moved. The consequences were documented. And the bill had a ceiling. Here's how that worked in practice. The farms adopted efficiency measures and conservation programs, and the result was less runoff into the sea and more conserved water for cities. That water moved west through the All-American Canal. It filled San Vicente Reservoir. From there, it moved through San Diego's other reservoirs and treatment plants, and eventually came out of your tap. They weren't negotiating water. They were negotiating risk. To understand why every party signed, you have to understand what each of them was afraid of. San Diego's problem was that it sat at the end of the pipeline. The Metropolitan Water District controlled the tap, and San Diego was the last city in line. MWD rationing hit San Diego hard in the early 1990s, and there was almost no independent supply to fall back on. When MWD cut deliveries, San Diego had nothing else to pull from. The QSA wasn't just a water deal. It was a way out of that dependency, a separate senior priority supply that San Diego controlled and Los Angeles couldn't touch. Imperial Irrigation District's calculation was different. The IID held some of the oldest Colorado River water rights in the state, rights senior enough that they drew full allocations even during shortages. But those rights came with a federal condition: use the water or risk losing the right. By the 1990s, federal pressure was building on western states to account for every acre-foot they claimed. Imperial couldn't afford to waste water on fields it wasn't farming. The QSA let them monetize the conserved portion by selling it to coastal cities, fund efficiency upgrades to their irrigation infrastructure, and keep their senior rights fully intact by proving the water was being put to beneficial use. They sold what they'd already been losing to inefficiency and got paid for it. Sacramento's position was the most complicated. California had been over-allocating Colorado River water for decades, drawing more than its legal share under the 1922 Colorado River Compact, while other states watched. Federal officials had been threatening to force California into compliance, which would have meant mandatory cuts across the entire state system, not a negotiated deal. The QSA finally brought California's allocation into legal balance. Sacramento accepted open-ended financial responsibility for the Salton Sea, because the alternative was losing control of the entire negotiation. The state took the environmental bill to close the accounting fight before Washington closed it for them. Those 8 years of negotiation weren't about anyone being unreasonable. Each party had a genuine problem, and the QSA solved all of them at once. That's what made it signable. The Salton Sea sat in the middle of every conversation because everyone knew the lake's fate was part of the price, and every party calculated that the price was worth paying. The final agreement was a carefully structured legal transaction. Imperial kept its rights and sold the conserved portion. San Diego got supply independence. Coachella locked in its own guarantees. And the Salton Sea got a capped mitigation fund and a state promise to handle whatever came after. Now here's the contradiction. During the 8 years of negotiation, every agency at the table received hydrological modeling showing what would happen to the sea. The water agencies weren't surprised. The QSA's own environmental review acknowledged that reduced agricultural drainage would accelerate the sea's decline, expose lakebed sediments, and create air quality problems for communities downwind. That language was in the documents they all signed. The document uses the CEQA phrase, potentially significant and unavoidable. That means the harm couldn't be fully mitigated, and they approved it anyway under overriding considerations. Every party that signed the QSA signed a document that said, in formal legal language, that people near the Salton Sea would face air quality harm the project could not prevent. They signed anyway, and then they structured the deal so that above $133 million, the state covers mitigation costs. Not as a backup, not as overflow funding. The implementing documents put it in writing. Anything above the cap was Sacramento's problem by design, and the structure makes the incentive obvious. Officials signed the deal in 2003. The water started moving west towards San Diego's reservoirs, and the lake started doing exactly what basic hydrology predicted it would do when you cut the ag return flows to a terminal lake in a desert climate. And remember, $133 million. That's the line. The Salton Sea began shrinking faster. The same terminal lake problem, now exposed to the wind. By the mid-2020s, multiple research teams have found associations between reduced inflows, exposed playa, and worsening air quality in nearby communities. The receipt came from a UC Irvine-led team. Researchers measured lung function in children living near the sea and found it measurably reduced, consistent with chronic exposure to fine particulate matter blowing off the exposed playa. Children's lungs are still developing, so the damage from that kind of exposure doesn't stay static. Residents of Mecca, Calipatria, and surrounding Imperial Valley communities had raised concerns about high asthma rates for years before any researchers showed up with a monitor. The lab data didn't discover the problem. It confirmed what people already knew from breathing the air. The physical distance between San Diego and the Salton Sea is about 150 miles. But if you live in San Diego and you turn on your tap, you are on one end of a system whose other end is a cracked lakebed in the desert. Every gallon of conserved water that reaches a San Diego faucet is a gallon that no longer reaches the sea. The water bill you pay funds a district that negotiated this trade, understood the consequences before signing, and then capped its financial responsibility at a number that didn't match the scale of the problem. The lake's shrinkage isn't a side effect of the QSA, it's a direct and acknowledged consequence built into the agreement structure from the beginning. The $133 million was never designed to restore the Salton Sea. The deal structured it as bridge funding, a short-term buffer meant to hold the line while the state figured out a long-term restoration plan. In practice, the mitigation money mostly went to temporary stopgaps: water, habitat measures, and monitoring. It was designed to suppress the symptoms, not treat the cause. And it was explicitly temporary by design because the agencies wrote the overage clause before a single gallon moved west. So where did $133 million come from? Not science, a settlement term. The cap reads like a negotiated number: certainty for the agencies and a ceiling on financial responsibility. Once they hit that ceiling, state law kicked in, and Sacramento covers anything above it. The problem isn't that the money ran out, it's that the money was always going to run out, and the deal was written to make that someone else's problem when it did. In December 2022, the federal government agreed to provide $245 million for Salton Sea restoration work through the Inflation Reduction Act. Most of it was contingent, tied to IID's water conservation efforts. That's already larger than the entire cap the water agencies negotiated in 2003. One federal funding package, tied to project milestones, exceeded what San Diego and its partners priced as the full cost of the environmental damage. The original deal didn't undershoot by a little. It wasn't close. In May 2025, California began flowing water to create new wetlands. The project fills shallow ponds on hundreds of acres of dry lake bed to control dust and provide bird habitat. And it's one of the first major efforts using actual water flow rather than just planning documents. There's an unanswered tension in the numbers. The cap was set at $133 million in 2003 dollars, and the lake has shrunk faster than anyone at the table predicted. The original deal priced the environmental cost at a specific number. The environment has not agreed to stay within that budget. This is where the case file lands. San Diego secured the water security it needed. The agreement gave the region independent, senior priority Colorado River supplies that reduced dependence on Los Angeles-controlled sources. Imperial Valley earned the economic benefits of selling conserved water, but the Salton Sea received a shrinking shoreline, a cracked lakebed, and a legal structure that capped the water agency's financial responsibility, while leaving the state on the hook for the rest. The dust in Imperial Valley is the receipt for San Diego's water security. Your water security rests on a deal that priced the environmental damage at $133 million and left the rest for the state to figure out on its own. The receipt is still being written in dust and lung function data. The next case file is underneath downtown San Diego, literally. People talk about secret tunnels under the old Chinatown at 3rd and J opium dens, trapdoors in basement walls, corridors that don't line up with the buildings above them. The tunnels aren't the story. The real document is a 1920s condemnation file that shows a city systematically using zoning and blight declarations to legally cage a community into a shrinking footprint. The tunnels were a response to that paper trail, not the cause of it. And when the city finally demolished the neighborhood, it buried both. That's the next case file. Subscribe so you don't miss it.